The late afternoon sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Argent Tower, casting golden light across the pristine white marble floor. Chandeliers sparkled overhead, and the polished brass railings gleamed like they had been cleaned just seconds ago. Everything about the place screamed perfection. Every step echoed as though it had been rehearsed. Bellboys in white gloves stood at attention. The scent of lavender diffusers lingered gently in the air. This was not a place for uncertainty. It was a cathedral of luxury, where appearance was gospel and wealth its prayer. People did not just check in here. They arrived, were observed, and measured. No one noticed the man who stepped quietly through the revolving glass doors. He was not loud, not rushed, not accompanied by a handler or chauffeur. There was no designer luggage wheeled behind him, no entourage. Just a simple black backpack slung over one shoulder, a pair of well-worn boots that had clearly seen more pavement than carpet, and a gray hoodie with edges faded from too many washes. His hair was a bit tousled, as if the wind outside had had its way with it. His face carried a calm, almost meditative stillness. Most would have walked past him without a second glance, and most did. But a few people, tourists mostly, glanced his way. Their eyes lingered, squinting, trying to place him. A couple nudged each other. Is that... No, it can't be. Why would Keanu Reeves walk in here looking like that? He approached the reception desk without pause, without hesitation. The young woman behind the counter wore a crisp navy blazer with gold-embroidered trim. Her hair was tied back into a perfect bun. A polite, rehearsed smile appeared on her lips as he handed over a folded piece of paper. She glanced at it, expecting perhaps a reservation code, maybe a high-tier rewards number, but instead it was a printed hotel coupon. Promotional voucher, paper creased in the middle, the corners slightly frayed. "Good afternoon," Keanu said. His voice low and even, never rushed. "I'd like to book a room." The receptionist, her name tag read Clarice, hesitated for just a moment. She scanned the coupon. Her brow furrowed slightly but not unkindly. It was legitimate, rare but valid. Complimentary 2-night stay, spa access, no blackout dates. She was about to process the check-in when a voice interrupted from across the room. Sharp, theatrical, and unmistakably performative. "Clarice." It snapped like the crack of a whip. "Step aside." The sound of hard shoes clicked rapidly against marble. Heads turned as a tall man in a tailored charcoal suit emerged from a side hallway. His face was narrow, almost hawkish, and his silver-streaked hair was slicked back like a film villain preparing for his monologue. This was Maurice Delicourt, the hotel's general manager. He carried himself like a man who believed the hotel lobby was his personal theater, and every guest a background actor in his performance of power. He approached the desk, giving Keanu the briefest of glances before fixing his gaze on the crumpled voucher. He picked it up with a kind of practiced distaste, as though even touching it stained his fingers. "Sir," he said, drawing the word out, "perhaps you are unaware of where you are." Keanu looked at him calmly, not the slightest flicker of irritation. "Argent Tower," he said. "Paris." Maurice let out a laugh, short and theatrical, then turned to Clarice. "We do not accept walk-ins with coupons. This isn't a budget motel." Keanu's posture didn't change. He simply replied, "It's valid, from your official marketing campaign." Maurice didn't look at the coupon again. He didn't need to. His mind was made. With a flourish, he raised it in front of the growing audience in the lobby and ripped it in two. The sound was sharp, paper tearing like fabric being split. It echoed louder than it should have, because people had started to quiet down. They were watching now, curious, phones lifted discreetly, faces leaned forward. "I suggest," Maurice said, each word now clearly meant for the spectators, "you try somewhere more suitable. Perhaps in the outer districts. Argent is for serious clients, not for those waving flyers." A few chuckles drifted across the lobby. Someone whispered, "Is that really Keanu Reeves?" Another replied, "Nah, can't be." Keanu wouldn't use a coupon. Keanu stood there unmoved, not flinching, not embarrassed, just quiet. The torn paper fluttered to the floor between them, landing softly like white confetti from a cruel celebration. Then Maurice leaned in, voice now a low hiss. "I don't care who you think you are. This building is for those who belong." Two security guards had appeared silently behind him, dressed in sleek black suits, their earpieces barely visible. Maurice gestured without looking. "Please escort this man outside." The guards stepped forward without asking. Keanu bent down calmly, picked up his backpack, and slung it back over his shoulder. His hands never tightened into fists. His expression never hardened. He turned slowly and walked toward the lobby doors, flanked on either side by silent enforcers. The glint of polished brass and gold trimmings reflected in the glass ahead of him, and as the massive golden doors of Argent swung open, the world that had ignored him now watched with sharpened focus. Phones raised higher, whispers louder. Still Keanu said nothing. Just before stepping out into the Paris street, a hint of something passed across his face. Not quite a smile, not quite indifference. Something between memory and calculation. And then he was gone. Side the city buzzed. But inside the hotel, something had shifted. It hadn't broken yet, but the crack had begun. No one realized it at that moment. But the next 5 minutes would change everything. Not just for Maurice, not just for Argent, but for an entire empire built on appearances. The heavy glass doors closed behind him with a soft hiss, muffling the clamor that had begun to swell inside the Argent Tower. Keanu Reeves stood momentarily still on the steps outside, the sun catching the edge of his face as he adjusted the strap of his backpack. The late afternoon glow bathed the entrance in gold, casting long shadows across the polished pavement. For a brief moment, it felt as though the world had stilled. But then the laughter began. First a trickle, then a wave. Inside the lobby, where just minutes ago every motion had been orderly and reverent, chaos now brewed under the surface of polished propriety. Guests turned to one another, whispering. A few influencers, draped in labels and armed with cameras, leaned over balcony railings, giggling at their screens. "He's broke," someone said, almost gleeful. He tried to pay with a flyer. Phones were already lifted in shaky hands. One young woman with platinum blonde hair and a glittery phone case zoomed in, angling her camera toward the street. Her voice carried over the murmur, loud enough to be recorded. "That's Keanu Reeves, right? Oh my God, he looks homeless." She laughed, as if the humiliation of another was her entertainment for the day. No one stopped her. No one challenged the tone. Around the bar, a group of guests sipping cocktails turned to see what the fuss was about. Their expressions amused, unbothered, entertained. They didn't see a man. They saw a meme forming in real time. Back outside, Keanu took a slow breath. The security guards, no longer escorting him but now lingering like shadows, had dropped his backpack at his feet. It landed with a thud, solid, final. A valet in a red-trimmed uniform stepped forward, smiling with mock courtesy. "Sir," he said with a full concerned tone that was more sneer than service, "shall I call you an Uber, or is that too expensive now?" More laughter. Keanu did not respond. He knelt slightly, picked up his bag, brushed a faint speck of dust from its fabric, and stood upright again. His posture was still relaxed, his face unreadable. But inside the lobby, the spectacle was not yet finished. Maurice Delicourt had returned to the doorway, arms folded across his chest like a theater director watching the final act of a play he believed he had written. He raised his voice, projecting it just enough to carry through the thick glass and over the heads of the crowd. "Let it be known," he announced, his chin lifted high. "Argent does not serve freeloaders or imposters." His words hit the air like a slap. They didn't just echo, they stuck. Phones caught every second, every syllable, and the digital world waited eagerly to chew it all up. Then came the moment no one would ever forget. A young waiter, no older than 25, named Hugo, emerged from the far end of the lobby. He was carrying a silver tray with 2 glasses of red wine, walking toward Maurice without question. But before anyone understood what was happening, Maurice grabbed one of the glasses, crystal, deep Bordeaux, and with a sudden snap of motion, hurled its contents toward the man standing outside. The wine flew through the air in a perfect arc. It struck Keanu square in the chest. The splash of deep red soaked his gray hoodie, streaking down the fabric like blood from an open wound. There was a sharp gasp from someone near the revolving doors. A woman's voice rose, outraged. "That's too far, man." But no one stepped in. No one moved. All the phones remained up, recording, feeding the moment into the bloodstream of the internet. Keanu didn't flinch, not even a blink. Instead, he slowly raised one hand and flicked the sleeve of his hoodie, as if brushing off a leaf. His expression didn't change. His voice, when it came, was even. "I only came here for a room." Maurice stepped forward again, emboldened. "And I told you," he said, his voice growing louder. "This place isn't for you." His words sliced the air like broken glass. The gold-trimmed doors loomed behind him, ornate and glowing in the light. But their shine had begun to feel more like a lie than a symbol of prestige. Inside, guests were no longer smiling. Some had lowered their phones. Others were whispering, not with amusement now, but with unease. Something had shifted. An unspoken line had been crossed. Still no one acted. No one intervened. Far above the lobby, 2 floors up and behind a wall of glass tinted against the sun, Elena Rousseau stood frozen beside her desk. Her office was sleek, sharp, steel frames, chrome finishes, a skyline view of Paris that most executives would envy. But her eyes were no longer focused on the Eiffel Tower. They were locked on the scene playing out below. Her assistant, a young man named Thierry, hovered beside her, watching as the wine dripped slowly down the man's chest on the security feed. "Ma'am," Thierry said quietly, hesitant. "That man, wasn't he?" Elena didn't answer right away. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the desk. Her jaw had gone stiff. She leaned forward slightly as the feed zoomed in on Keanu's face. He looked peaceful, not defeated, not furious, but completely still. That kind of stillness you only see in people who have decided not to react because they already know something you do not. "No one touches him," Elena murmured finally, her voice lower than a whisper. "No one." But even as she said it, she knew it was already too late. Back on the street, Keanu slowly turned away from the hotel. He didn't shout, didn't curse, didn't even glance back. He simply adjusted the strap of his backpack once more and began walking. Step by step, boots tapping gently against the stone street. The security guards didn't follow. They simply faded back into the shadows of the revolving doors, unsure now if they had just made the worst mistake of their professional lives. Inside the hotel, the silence after the act was heavy. Clarice stood at the front desk, her hands still resting near the keyboard where the check-in should have happened. She looked pale, her lips slightly parted. She knew something had gone terribly wrong, but it wasn't just her. The energy in the lobby had changed. The guests weren't laughing anymore. Phones were still recording, but now with hesitation. The performance was over. And the weight of what they had just witnessed was beginning to settle on everyone's shoulders, because they hadn't just mocked a man with a coupon. They had thrown wine at Keanu Reeves. They had escorted out a man who would soon decide their future. They had laughed at humility, and they didn't know it yet, but they'd just become the punchline of their own tragedy. The atmosphere in Elena Rousseau's office had grown dense, the kind of heavy stillness that seeps into a room when something irreversible has just taken place. Sunlight no longer streamed through the glass as brightly as it had moments before. The Eiffel Tower, standing tall in the distance beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, seemed almost like a silent witness to the misstep unfolding beneath its gaze. Elena stood rigid beside her sleek black desk, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her jaw tense as she watched the hotel lobby surveillance feed on the embedded monitor glowing from her desk surface. Terry, her assistant, stood silently behind her, too afraid to interrupt the trance she had fallen into. "Rewind again," she said, her voice sharp, slicing through the quiet. Terry quickly tapped the monitor controls. The video scrolled backward. The guards flanking Keanu, Morris's smug face, the glass of wine mid-flight, the coupon tearing in two. The moment Keanu stood still as a statue while red liquid streaked down his hoodie. Elena stared hard at each frame, absorbing not just what had happened, but how it had happened. The tone, the posture, the arrogance of it all. She pressed pause. Keanu's face filled the screen. Frozen in the moment just after the wine struck him. Calm, unreadable, not angry but absolutely, chillingly composed. Elena narrowed her eyes. There was no mistaking him now. The stillness in his eyes was the same one she had seen in boardrooms where billions moved without a whisper. It was the expression of someone who didn't need to raise his voice to command the entire room. And now he had stood in her lobby, tested their values, and they had failed. Spectacularly. "Madame Rousseau," Terry began gently, choosing his words with care. That was him, wasn't it? Mr. Reeves. His voice trembled slightly, not from fear of Keanu, but from what this meant for their future. "Yes," Elena replied, not turning away from the screen. Her voice was clipped and cold. "That was Mr. Keanu Reeves." Terry blinked. "But I thought he was scheduled to arrive tomorrow, under a different name." "Quiet entry, private escort." Elena nodded once. "That was the plan." Terry paused. "Then, why today?" "He came early," she said, folding her arms again. "No notice, no team, no entourage. He came to see who we really are." Terry's face paled. "He was testing us." Elena finally turned from the screen to look at him directly. "He wanted to see how we treat people. Not investors, not celebrities, just people." She walked to the window, staring down at the now chaotic scene outside the hotel. Guests whispering, phones raised, laughter having turned to speculation. Paris itself seemed to hesitate. "And Maurice failed that test," Terry said, his voice almost inaudible. "No," Elena corrected. "We all did." The buzzer on her intercom chirped twice. Voice came through. "Madame Rousseau, Mr. Delicourt is requesting a meeting." Elena didn't answer right away. She took in a breath so slow and controlled it sounded like she was bracing for impact. "Tell him I'm in a meeting," she said evenly. Terry hesitated. "Should I reschedule him?" "No," she turned, walking slowly back toward her desk. "There will not be another meeting." She sank into the high-backed leather chair and tapped the screen once more, letting the footage run again in silence. The paper tearing, the wine flying, the silence that followed. She watched it not as a video but as a slow-motion autopsy of arrogance. Every second was a wound. Every smirk from Maurice a stain on the company's soul. "This wasn't just a man asking for a room," she said quietly, mostly to herself now. "This was a character check. And we failed in front of the world." Terry remained still, not sure if he should stay or excuse himself. He understood what she meant now. Keanu hadn't come early out of impatience or accident. He had come without warning because he wanted to observe, unfiltered, unpolished. And the result had been a spectacle of cruelty captured from every angle. Elena looked again at Keanu's expression on the screen. It hadn't changed once during the entire ordeal. He had not yelled, not scolded, not demanded anything. He had accepted the humiliation without blinking. That frightened her more than if he had shouted. It was a kind of quiet power that made noise feel irrelevant. "What do we do when he comes back?" Terry finally asked cautiously. Elena tapped her fingers slowly against the desk. "We wait." "For what?" "For his decision," she said. "Because when he returns, and he will, it will not be for explanations. It will be for judgment." Downstairs, the lobby still buzzed with whispers. Maurice was pacing outside her office now, probably realizing too late that something was wrong. But Elena had already made her decision. There would be no apology that could fix this. No PR campaign, no boardroom excuse. Because when Keanu Reeves tested a company, it wasn't about a contract. It was about the soul of the place. And the Argent Tower had just shown its soul. Ugly, shallow, and proud of it. A soul like that didn't just cost deals. Cost everything. The boardroom on the 51st floor of Argent Tower had never known this kind of silence. Not the elegant, curated quiet of expensive architecture, but the heavy, suffocating stillness that comes when something enormous is about to happen. Outside, Paris shimmered through floor-to-ceiling glass, the Eiffel Tower standing tall in the morning haze. But no one at the long, polished conference table noticed the view. All eyes were turned toward the mirrored elevator doors at the far end of the room. The executives of Argent Group sat like statues, stone-faced directors, nervous vice presidents, and at the head of the table, Elena Rousseau, motionless but radiating quiet power. Next to her, Maurice Delicourt dabbed the sweat off his forehead with a silk handkerchief that now clung limp and damp in his trembling hand. He had not spoken in nearly 10 minutes. He could not. The air felt pressurized, as though the entire room was holding its breath. The only sound was the ticking of the Cartier wall clock, tick a countdown, each second another step toward the inevitable. Then the elevator chimed. It was the softest sound, almost delicate, but in that moment, it rang like a bell tolling the arrival of something final. The doors parted smoothly, and the man who stepped out was not the one they remembered from the lobby. Gone were the dusty boots, the faded hoodie, the black backpack that looked too ordinary for this place. Now he was a vision of quiet authority. Keanu Reeves in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, black tie knotted cleanly at his collar, shoes polished to a gleam that mirrored the marble beneath his feet. His hair was slicked back with precision, not vanity, and his amber eyes swept the room with a calm so complete it froze time. No one spoke. Maurice made a small sound in the back of his throat, a breath or maybe a prayer. He rose slightly from his chair, his mouth opening. That's impossible. Keanu didn't answer. He didn't need to. His steps were slow, deliberate, echoing in the silence as he crossed the room. He reached the center of the table and placed something onto it with great care. A black backpack, the same one from before. He left it there like a symbol, like a relic that had just witnessed the turning of fate. Still no one dared move. Then Elena rose. Her voice was crisp, formal, but laced with something else. Respect, yes, but also caution, like someone addressing a storm disguised in a man's suit. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "allow me to formally introduce Mr. Keanu Reeves, CEO of Silver Phoenix Investments." It hit like a thunderclap. The words hung in the air for a heartbeat before the whispers started. "Silver Phoenix," muttered one director. "The group backing our expansion," another breathed. 3.8 billion. Someone gasped audibly. Chairs creaked, eyes widened. But the man at the center of the room didn't move, didn't smile. He stood rooted, the perfect storm in tailored wool. Maurice had gone ghost pale. His lips parted again, dry and cracking. I didn't know," he stammered. "No one told me, Madame Rousseau, you didn't ask." Keanu's voice interrupted, low and clear. It sliced through the noise like a scalpel. Maurice froze. The room did too. "You saw a man walk into your lobby," Keanu continued, his tone calm but cold as the Paris winter. "A man with a coupon in his hand. That was enough for you to decide everything." He turned now, looking directly at Maurice. "You didn't bother to find out who he was. You didn't ask a question. You didn't offer dignity. You made a judgment." Maurice tried again. "Sir, I thought." "That," Keanu said, voice firmer now, "is exactly the problem. You thought. You assumed. You treated someone as less because they didn't look the part. Because they walked in quietly." He looked around the room now, slowly taking in each executive one by one. "And that," he said, "is not a company I choose to invest in." The words fell like stones into deep water. No one moved. No one even breathed. Elena remained standing, but her face had gone pale. Mr. Reeves has full and final authority on Silver Phoenix's capital commitments, she said. His decision is binding. Morris's mouth worked in panic. You can't just. But Keanu had already turned, walking back toward the elevator with the same calm, deliberate pace. No raised voice, no dramatic flourish. Just the kind of silence that made you understand something enormous had just shifted. The door slid open behind him, a mirror catching his reflection one last time. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. And as the doors closed, Maurice slumped back into his chair, face crumpling as though the breath had been knocked from his body. He wasn't just losing a deal. He was becoming a cautionary tale. Outside, the skyline of Paris gleamed on, oblivious to what had just unfolded in the sky-high meeting room. But inside that boardroom, something had broken, and there was no fixing it. The $3.8 billion deal was gone. Argent's future had just walked out the door, and all that remained was a backpack on the table, and a silence so heavy it would echo in their ears long after the press got hold of the story. By the time the sun had fully set over Paris, the air around Argent Tower felt strangely electrified, as if the building itself had begun to realize something was wrong. Inside, what had once been a fortress of polished marble and quiet wealth had transformed into a war zone of whispered phone calls, trembling hands, and rapidly evaporating confidence. Journalists had begun crowding the marble steps outside by early evening, clutching camera equipment and frantically checking social feeds. A podium had been hastily assembled beneath the centerpiece chandelier in the grand lobby, once a space reserved for champagne toasts and seasonal decor, now reduced to a damage control theater lit by cold LED panels and desperate eyes. Security staff looked overwhelmed. PR reps fumbled with notes. Elena Rousseau stood beside the podium with arms folded and jaw clenched, her composure fraying at the edges but not yet broken. Maurice Delicourt, however, was already crumbling. He hovered near the back of the lobby, his once slicked hair disheveled, suit jacket hanging unevenly off one shoulder, tie undone and forgotten. His skin had turned the sickly gray of a man who knew his career was ending in real time. He watched the crowd swell and ripple like a sea about to crash. His name had become its own hashtag. Hashtag Coupongate was trending across Europe. One clip of him sneering at Keanu was already being looped across every major news network. A second clip, the wine glass shattering on Keanu's chest, had hit 100 million views before midnight. No one was talking about Argent's portfolio. No one cared about the spa amenities or penthouse suites. Everyone was talking about the man they had mocked, filmed, and ejected. And then he returned. Keanu Reeves walked back into the building, not as a guest, not as an investor, but as a stormfront in human form. He did not wear a tie. His suit was sharp, simple, perfectly cut. His posture was relaxed, but there was an unmistakable gravity in the air around him. Conversations died instantly. Reporters lowered their mics in stunned silence. He stepped up to the podium and rested both hands on its marble surface. Behind him, the crystal chandelier seemed almost ashamed to sparkle. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice low but carrying with quiet authority. "My name is Keanu Reeves. Some of you may know me as an actor. Others know me as the CEO of Silver Phoenix Investments." There was a rustle through the crowd, an almost imperceptible exhale of disbelief. "Earlier today, I arrived at Argent Tower anonymously," he continued. "I carried with me a valid promotional voucher distributed by Argent's own marketing department. I requested a room, nothing more. What followed was not a misunderstanding. It was a demonstration, values, of behavior." He paused and looked up, eyes sweeping the sea of faces. His expression remained unreadable, calm but unwavering. "In response to that simple request," he said, "I was mocked, I was humiliated, and I was physically removed from the building." The words hung in the air like thick smoke. No one spoke, no one blinked. "That is not just bad service, that is bad character." Then came the blow. Effective immediately, Keanu said, his voice never rising. Silver Phoenix Investments is withdrawing its full financial commitment to the Argent Group. The room froze. The entire lobby, so used to whispers and curated sounds, now drowned in stunned silence. Then came the ripple, a collective reaction of disbelief. Cameras clicked. Reporters shouted, "Mr. Reeves, is this due to today's events? Will Argent recover? Do you believe this will affect the luxury sector as a whole?" But Keanu remained still, unfazed. "I came here not as a billionaire, not as a public figure," he said. "I came here as a man asking to be treated with basic respect." His eyes found Maurice at the back of the lobby, and I saw what happens when that respect is denied. Maurice instinctively stepped forward, sweat beading on his forehead. A junior staff member handed him a microphone. His hand shook as he raised it. "Mr. Reeves, please. This was a mistake. We didn't know. I didn't know who you were." Keanu looked at him. Just looked. And it was enough to make Maurice take a half step backward. "I believe in second chances," Keanu said quietly. "But not for people who make cruelty their first instinct." The microphone slipped slightly in Morris's hand. His shoulders sagged. He looked older in that moment, stripped of the arrogance that had once armored him. Keanu turned back to the crowd. "This isn't about money," he said. "It's about how we treat the quiet person standing in line, the stranger with nothing to prove, the guest with dust on their boots." He stepped away from the podium then, his voice falling silent. But the message remained like a thunderclap that refused to fade. Elena followed him without a word. The two disappeared into the elevator, leaving behind a lobby that had become a monument to the moment everything broke. By the next morning, the collapse had begun in earnest. Argent Group's stock had fallen 47% overnight. Headlines screamed across financial outlets like falling dominoes. $3.8 billion deal destroyed. Silver Phoenix pulls out of Argent. CEO of luxury group humiliated billionaire philanthropist. Internally, the crisis was even worse. Executives argued behind glass doors. Emergency board meetings were called and cancelled. Lawyers ran circles. Investors screamed for explanations. Departments received notice of urgent restructuring, a corporate euphemism for layoffs. Hundreds of staff were dismissed within 48 hours. The company was bleeding from the inside out. And in the corner office once occupied by Maurice Delacourt, the man himself sat alone, watching the viral clips on repeat. Each loop of the wine splash seemed louder. Each frame of Keanu standing still in the storm seemed colder. Morris's own voice, once a weapon of elitism, had become a meme. His words, "This place isn't for people like you," were now plastered on protest signs outside the building. Groups had formed. Some were staff, others guests. Still others just citizens who were tired of watching arrogance get a pass. They stood on the steps of Argent with cardboard and conviction. Respect before profit. Keanu was right. Kindness is luxury. The building's website went offline by the third day. Investors pulled out of other pending deals. Celebrities voiced support online. News segments replayed the footage every hour. Argent Tower, once the gold-plated jewel of Paris, was no longer a symbol of wealth. It had become a lesson, a warning, a monument to everything that could go wrong when respect was treated as optional. And as the building's future slipped further into uncertainty, one truth echoed louder than any quarterly report. They had underestimated the wrong man. 1 month later, the gilded letters that once spelled Argent Tower were no longer visible beneath the Parisian skyline. In their place, a single matte black panel now rested above the main entrance. Sleek, modest, and profoundly different. Where glimmering gold and towering ego had once stood, a quiet statement had taken its place. The Reeves Center for Community Housing. There was no ribbon-cutting ceremony, no press conference, no branded welcome mats or influencer guest lists. It opened as quietly as it had transformed, without ceremony, just purpose. That was exactly how Keanu wanted it. Inside, the lobby had been stripped of its velvet ropes, its chandeliers, its polished stone countertops. Gone were the crystal glasses, the perfume diffusers, the corporate art. In their place stood simple oak desks staffed by smiling volunteers. Scuff-proof rubber tiles now covered the floors where marble had once reflected diamond shoes. Soft overhead lighting had replaced the dramatic spotlighting. The reception area was no longer curated for wealth. It was designed for warmth. Where once a VIP concierge had greeted exclusive guests, children now ran laughing across the open space. Young mothers signed housing paperwork. Veterans carried duffel bags to assigned rooms. A nurse in green scrubs explained medical services to a woman holding her baby. On one wall near the entrance, behind a thin layer of protective glass, hung a small framed display. Inside it, two halves of a torn hotel coupon rested side by side. Creased, faded, but perfectly preserved. Below the glass, a simple brass plaque read, "Dignity is not for sale. Remember why this building stands." That afternoon, Keanu Reeves walked through the building quietly. He wore no suit. No cameras followed. Just a black shirt, sleeves rolled to his forearms, dark jeans, and his same black backpack slung loosely over one shoulder. Elena Rousseau walked beside him, holding a clipboard, her expression calm and focused. She had stayed on, not as CFO of a luxury brand, but as director of operations for the center. There had been no negotiation. She had simply offered. Keanu had simply nodded. "This place is fully funded?" he asked. His voice soft as they passed a small library nook where an older man was helping two children read picture books. Elena nodded. Silver Phoenix Foundation signed the full operational commitment. 60 permanent housing units, 50 shelter beds, medical center on the second floor, classrooms and job training center on the third, community kitchen and food pantry open 5 days a week. Keanu paused by one of the hallway windows and looked out over the Paris skyline, the same skyline he had once watched from a boardroom, preparing to invest in a tower of glass and greed. Now, that same tower sheltered people who had never stepped foot in such a place before. Felt right. "It feels better now," he said, almost to himself. Elena smiled faintly, but then hesitated. "We've had offers," she added. 3 real estate groups, quiet but serious. They want to buy the building back. Premium rates. Keanu didn't flinch. "Let them keep their offers." She nodded, understanding. After a moment she asked, "Why this building though? You could have sold it and built 3 shelters somewhere else." Keanu looked at her, his eyes holding the same stillness that had unnerved an entire boardroom. "Because this is where it happened," he said simply. And in that sentence was everything. The humiliation, the silence, the whine, the cruel laughter, the stillness with which he had walked away. This was where the harm was done, and this is where the healing needed to begin. That evening, as the sun began to set over Paris and golden light streamed through the windows of the transformed lobby, Keanu agreed, reluctantly, to one interview. No networks, no headlines. Just a local public access crew with a small camera, a handheld mic, and a sincere desire to understand. He stood in front of the new entrance, the words "Reeves Center" carved quietly into stone behind him. A modest crowd had gathered, but no one pushed forward. No one shouted. There was no celebrity buzz in the air, just stillness and quiet admiration. The reporter, a middle-aged woman with silver hair and kind eyes, asked the question gently. "Mr. Reeves, you walked away from a €3.8 billion deal. You turned one of Paris's most exclusive buildings into a shelter. Some people say you could have just sold the property and donated the proceeds. Why didn't you?" Keanu looked into the lens, his voice unwavering. "Money can be moved anywhere," he said. "But trust has to be earned where it was broken." The camera zoomed slightly closer as he continued. "This building used to stand for something else. It used to decide who mattered based on shoes and suits. Now it stands for everyone who's been looked past. It stands for the ones no one made room for. Another reporter asked from the side, "Do you see this as revenge for how you were treated here?" Keanu shook his head. "No, revenge doesn't build homes. Respect does." He stepped away after that. No grand closing statement, no forced smiles. He walked up the steps and into the building, no different than any other guest. And just behind the entrance, standing in her new uniform, a soft gray sweater with a simple name badge, was Clarice, the same front desk clerk who had first seen him walk in with a folded coupon. She gave him a warm smile now. "Welcome back," she said quietly. Keanu smiled back. "Thanks. Good to be here." As he walked past her into the building, children's laughter echoed from the halls. Upstairs, families prepared dinner in shared kitchens. Lights glowed in rooms that had once been reserved for the elite. Now they belonged to people who needed them. There were no velvet ropes, no VIP keys, only open doors. Clarice turned toward the front again just as a new family stepped inside. She greeted them like she had greeted Keanu, with respect, with welcome, with kindness. One last reporter, standing on the sidewalk, called out as Keanu disappeared inside, "Mr. Reeves, what do you want people to remember from all this?" He paused for just a moment at the door, then turned slightly. "Kindness is louder than profit," he said. "It just takes a little longer to be heard." Then the door closed behind him, and the tower that once stood for exclusion now stood for something far more permanent. Quiet justice.